I might ask this question publicly, but sometimes it's cool to get the answer first.
So is it after or is it on the agenda? Yeah.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight to meeting number 5 of the General Plan Subcommittee. I'm going to call roll. Ken Chin,
Here.
Cliff Robbins,
Here.
Amaranth Lee,
Here.
Eric Rodriguez.
Here.
Ramiro Maldonado is excused. Rick Bonilla,
Here.
Ellen Mallory is present. I'm going to start off tonight by welcoming our newest member of the subcommittee, Ken Chin. Ken is a resident of San Mateo, and he was also a staff member here at the city. He's currently a trustee on the San Mateo Foster City School District, and I think Ken will give us a great perspective on the impact on the schools. Ken, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Can you hear me in the back? Okay. We're going to open up the public comment period. This is for comment on items not found on tonight's agenda. Kathy, are there any speaker slips?
There are none.
Okay, we will proceed to new business. The first order of business is to elect a new vice chair.
I have a nomination.
Rick.
Palmer Unsley.
And is there a second to that nomination?
You don't need a second.
I don't need a second.
Seek other nominations.
I'm sorry if I may, there may be other nominations. Do you want to ask for that first?
Seek
Are there other nominations? Okay. Okay. All in favor of Amaranth Lee as the vice chair, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And those opposed? Congratulations, you are our new vice chair. You have time to run away if you need to. Next order of business is our vision statement, and I'm going to turn things over to staff.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm Joanna Jansen with PlaceWorks. We're the city's consultant on the general plan update, and I am going to run through the vision statement, and I have the clicker. Look at that. You guys have the agenda. Before I dive into the vision statement, we're going to talk about, we've already elected the vice chair. I'm going to talk to you about the vision statement. And most of tonight, we're going to be able to spend on the existing conditions reports. And we'll also give you a little bit of an overview of the next steps in the general plan update process. We're going to do all of that in a presentation, and then we're going to have time for public comment to hear from you. So again, you should have found a yellow slip on your chair when you come in. If you want to give that to Kathy at the end of the table here, she will keep track of the speakers, and then we'll ask you to come up to the mic when it's your turn.
Is this item a separate 3-minute slot than speaking on the existing condition?
So the public comment period that just closed was for items not on the agenda. We are then going to have a public comment period for anything on the agenda. So the vision statement, the existing conditions, everything else, you'll have a time for a 3-minute comment. So the vision statement was what we did when we were here in February. For those of you who were here at this meeting last month, we talked about the vision statement, the revised draft vision statement, and we got some GPS feedback on it. We incorporated that feedback and we took a revised vision statement to the Planning Commission at their March 12th meeting. The Planning Commission considered the GPS input as well as their own thoughts and ideas. We had, of course, public comment at that meeting as well. Ultimately, the Planning Commission made one change to the vision statement where the arts and culture phrase appeared under diversity. If you guys recall, this was something that you asked us as the consultant and the staff team to take a stab at. We did. The Planning Commission had an idea for how to do it even better, so they moved where that phrase appears in the revised vision statement. And that was really their only change to the vision statement that you forwarded them with your revisions. So the next step for this is that on April 1st, on Monday, the revised vision statement is going to go to the council, and they're going to consider the vision statement and have a chance to offer their feedback on it.
Could I offer some discussion on that right now?
Sure.
Okay, because I was here, I know what we talked about last
Yes.
time. I think there's still a chance to actually improve diversity, which
Uh-huh.
we just spoke about, because I'm looking at that, the second word there, we respect the experiences, and in thinking about it, respect is kind of a passive word, you know, and I think we want our draft to be maybe a little more assertive than that. I was thinking about words like we support and encourage the experiences, contributions, arts, culture, all those things. It's more action-oriented. It implies, I think, a greater acceptance in actually denoting participation.
So I think what I would say through the chair or with the further input of the chair is if the GPS wants to have more of a discussion about the vision statement and comments that could be relayed to the council before their meeting on the 1st, we can do that, and we probably should allow first the public comment period first before you guys dive into that in more detail or we hear other reactions. But I'm certainly happy to answer any questions about the vision statement or the process or the planning commission feedback or anything if you have any.
Through the chair. On the change the planning commission made, I watched a little bit of that meeting, and I understand that the main driver for that change was not necessarily the meaning, but it was more of they didn't like, or they didn't feel like it flowed well, of just having a sentence dangling at the end. And I understand that, and I agree that it didn't flow necessarily well, but I think the way that it was incorporated now completely changes, its context now completely changes what we were discussing beforehand. So what we were trying, or what I was proposing when I said this, and I think some others, it wasn't just me, was saying that we as a city value arts and culture, period. But then when you look for the shortest area to put it in, the only spot that was left was diversity. Okay, so that wasn't ideal, but let's put it there. And then when you take it out and you put it, we respect the experiences of contributions, arts and culture, and aspirations of people. Now, of course, we do respect the cultures of other people, but that completely changes the meaning of what we're saying. It's almost like a game of telephone where you're saying one thing and it goes, and by the time it gets to the end, it's completely different meaning. So. I don't think the way as it is right now is better than it was when it left here, personally. And I would almost prefer it be taken out completely and put into the next level goals as opposed to the way it is now, or finding a better home for it like as it was originally intended.
And if we're throwing other things on the table, I'll jump in. I was looking at the word inclusivity, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about inclusivity and the scope of it, and so I think of inclusivity as an active and intentional way of participating and contributing, and I think that goes beyond just decision making. And so I wanted to throw a suggestion out, which I think, it's a small edit, but I think that it will really encompass the full breadth of what we're talking about when we're talking about inclusivity. That I would suggest we change inclusivity to, we strive to include everyone in community life and decisions for a shared and sustainable future.
Would you repeat that, please?
Sure. We strive to include everyone in community life, so that's the edit, community life, and decisions for a shared and sustainable future. Shared, sustainable future.
So through the chair, I think I would propose to go ahead and continue the presentation for right now.
I think that's a good idea, and then
We'll-
we'll come back to this afterwards.
Yeah, we'll hear public comment. You guys are welcome to comment on the any of the items on the agenda, including the vision statement that's just been being discussed. And then the GPS can come back to this during their discussion, and we can discuss each of those proposed changes or other ideas that you might have. So the other major topic on our agenda for the evening is the revised existing conditions reports. This is the second General Plan Subcommittee looking at the existing conditions reports. The first draft of these reports was released last fall, and we got a lot of comments on them. And as part of the council direction regarding the course correction, we've had an opportunity to go back and make some additions to the reports. The most extensively revised report was the economics report. This slide gives you a list of some of the specific types of topic areas that we added, some of the data and discussion in the report in response to the public comments. Before we talk about the economics report specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of the existing conditions reports in the general plan update process overall, because I think that's very important to understand how we see these reports playing into the process and what we are hoping that you and the general public will get out of them. I really see the vision statement that we've just been talking about and the existing conditions reports as two very different but very important tools. The vision statement being very future focused and aspirational, very concise, using few words, and on the other hand, the existing conditions reports being very focused on today, a snapshot in time of what San Mateo is like right now, and something that can be really pretty detailed and inform our thinking about what the most important issues are that the general plan needs to address. But I really want to stress that this is not the only chance in the general plan update process for us to collect data, assimilate data, react to data, et cetera. We always want this to be a very informed and rigorous process. So these reports do not close the door on gathering information, reacting to information. We're going to be in the next stages of the process thinking about land use alternatives. That will really require us to understand more about not just existing conditions, but projected trends, which we have gotten into a bit in these reports, but we'll be getting into more as part of the land use alternatives. And the EIR, of course, the environmental impact report, which will come later in the process, and we'll look at the potential impacts, the physical impacts of these projects, is another chance to incorporate a lot of data about existing and future traffic congestion, for example, as well as a lot of data about the physical environment that hasn't been introduced in the process yet. So there are going to be additional opportunities. We know that a lot of you are really informed about the data that's out there and very excited to share that with us. So we encourage you to keep letting us know about your ideas and suggestions for potential data that should be incorporated into the process. And there definitely are additional opportunities to do that going forward. And Julia will say a little bit more about that as well. So returning to the existing conditions report, again, we've added some data on the economics report in particular about demographics here in San Mateo, particularly adding some additional information about vulnerable populations, health indicators, child care and schools, as well as a whole array of data about housing costs, housing supply, employment, both existing and projected, and a really important section on the city's fiscal conditions and hoping to start to build an understanding of how the city incurs costs and gains revenue and provides services to its residents, and what the potential effects on the city's fiscal condition might be in the future, so that we have that groundwork laid. Ashley Cannot from EPS, the economics sub-consultant on the general plan consultant team, is here tonight to answer questions, and the EPS is the author of some of those sections, and PlaceWorks is the author of some of the other sections that were added. So we're here tonight to discuss your questions about the reports or hear your comments on them.
So I think for the last slide, this is a multi-year process, and so there are next steps to this. So in addition to taking the vision statement to the City Council on April 1st, we are also taking a contract amendment to City Council. Just a brief summary, we got feedback and direction from the City Council at the January 22nd meeting to basically build more opportunities for community engagement. So part of that includes more workshops, more meetings, pop-up events, different tools, using technology better to engage the community and allow community members to provide feedback. So that is all going to be information presented to the council on the April 1st meeting. In regards to just future materials that will be included, there's also educational information that will be shared. So community workshops, that we've had in the past, I think a lot of community members identify several key issues and raise questions about information that they would like to have as part of those discussions about traffic, housing. And so those educational materials will be included in those future community events. And those additional information is intended to be shared with the broader community to build understanding before the community provides feedback on those topics. And so that will be coming up in the future. The other thing that we want to talk about is that information is grouped in a general category of education. And we want to be able to provide that information before the community provides feedback on identifying study areas, getting into land use alternatives discussions. And so there's a sequential sort of step in terms of when information is provided to the community and then when feedback is solicited and asked for. In regards to what we had talked about, vision statement happens first, and then we get into the hows. And the hows is, the goals and then the policies and the programs. And so following the vision statement process, then that's when we get into the hows. One last thing, I mentioned at the last meeting that we are posting public comments on the project website. After packet production, we did get 4 additional public comment materials, and I think some of it is out there. You may have picked it up. They look like these. Just, if you missed it, make sure that you get a copy of it. Otherwise, if we run out of copies, they will be posted on the project website.
And if I may, part of the contention in presenting the vision statement back to the General Plan Subcommittee today was to show you the changes that were recommended by the Planning Commission. The next step is going to Council on Monday, on April 1st. So the intention was not to recreate a conversation on the vision statement again tonight. The next step would be for the Council to provide feedback and then take that feedback and we'll incorporate what the Council's direction is next.
Can I ask if there's an opportunity to capture some of these comments and include them in the presentation to City Council for their discussion and consideration?
Yes, there is. I just want to make sure that we're all clear. This is it's an iterative process, and we can get into this never-ending loop of going back, through all the steps multiple times. So I do want to make sure that we're proactive and moving along. But we can have a conversation. We'll include it in our presentation. But the intention is not to keep, revising it over and over again and move on with some of the hows and the exciting next steps in the process.
Okay, we're going to open up the meeting now to public comment. For everyone who would like to speak this evening, please turn your yellow sheet in to Kathy here on the end of the table. It would be very much appreciated if you would turn it in now so that we know how many people would like to speak this evening so that everybody can get a chance and we can hear everybody's comments. Are there any other speaker slips? Kathy, how many do we have?
I have 6.
7, 8, 9.
So this is everybody who will be speaking this evening that has turned in a sheet here.
Did you want to have it?
It would be helpful if you would turn it in so we could include it in the timing numbers. I want you to be able to get the same time as everybody else.
Thank you.
18th.
Okay, public comment period will be 3 minutes per person. We're going to time it up here, and we'll give you notice when your 3 minutes is up, and if you would wrap it up, please, and sit down so that the next person can have their turn. So this is public comment on the vision statement and the existing conditions report and our next steps.
Shall I? Okay, so Robert Whitehair and Adam Nugent is up. After him, please.
Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm Robert Whitehair. I live in San Mateo after 37 years. At your last subcommittee meeting in February, you did talk about getting the word out to the community as much as possible. I think you've been successful, off to a good start. I was at a restaurant and I noticed the poster in the window announcing the general plan process. There's also another opportunity to have the public become involved in the issue of housing. As you know, my issue, what I'm most concerned about, is housing for all. There's going to be a meeting on April 27th called Community Conversations. It's a joint effort of the City of San Mateo, the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, and I believe Common Knowledge at San Mateo High School on April 27th. So what they're going to talk about, how's the issue affecting you and those you care about? Join us for a different type of dialogue about housing in our community on April 27th and May 18th, 2019. Community Conversations, Housing in San Mateo is a joint effort to talk about constructively about the shared challenge of housing. I participated as a facilitator in one of these last week in Brisbane. As you know, they're facing the issue with somewhere around 2,000 new units. I want to say it was a fantastic process. People were able to speak. Lots of people who spoke who never come to these meetings. So I encourage the people of San Mateo. You can find information about it on Community Conversations on the City of San Mateo website. I encourage everybody to attend. I do ask that the committee and the council consider somehow incorporating the very good information that will come out of that meeting into the general plan process. It's a very non-confrontational process where people from all walks of life, from all communities get involved, and I encourage everybody to attend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam Nugent is up. Karen Harrell is next.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Adam Nugent. I'm a landscape architect, and I'm the president of the Home Association of North Central. I'm also a homeowner, husband, and soon-to-be father. I would like a better geographic analysis of the impacts of past planning policies on our existing conditions report. I read it and I don't pull from it what exactly we should be doing. We really should be able to see and be pointed into a direction that can help us solve our problems. What does it mean to have a county where only 13% of households can afford the median home price? Someone asked me when I think growth will end. I can tell you that if we are lucky, it probably won't end until we can pay back our debts and fund our obligations. The economic report could have shown us that path. It should be giving us far more to help us make warranted and sustainable decisions. Our economy is booming, and yet the city has a deficit. Nationally, young people are poorer and have more debt than the previous generation. In our current state, we can barely afford to maintain our roads, let alone create amazing transit alternatives. This is unsustainable. I could talk for days about environmental sustainability and land use, but we are nothing if our children are handed a broke city. We've become fairly limited in our ability to levy taxes, so that is our playing field. The only major tool we have left in creating a financially resilient and sustainable city is our land use planning. We should be able to see the effects of the past decisions of land use on our current problems, or we will repeat them. An economic report barely scratches the surface. What does it mean to have a city where 13% of the households can afford the median home price? It actually means a lot. We learned how to build resilient settlements over thousands of years. The successful ones became quite lovely, and the insolvent ones disappeared. Save for a few great technologies like plumbing and electricity, illiterate lumberjacks were able to use that knowledge to build more pleasant cities than a room full of mid-century traffic engineers and modernist architects. Not unlike government pensions, most land use decisions of the mid to late 20th century were either completely divorced from the financial realities of providing levels of services, maintenance, and protection that we expect, or they assumed continued exponential economic growth. We are now witnessing how earlier decision makers accidentally borrowed from the future generations to create a new experimental living pattern. In the Bay Area, we choose to cover those costs with economic growth, a choice too many places in America can't make anymore. It may not last, but a crash is not the landing we should attempt. Environmental sustainability and economic sustainability should be of the same cloth. We, of each generation, now have a treadmill that speeds up. We need astronomical high property values and a booming economy even just to tread water.
Excuse me, if you could wrap up your
Sure.
comments.
On top of that, household debt has become enormous compared to government debt. Is your home really worth $2 million? So this is a geographic problem as much as economic. We need to be able to see what to
Could you
do
wrap
in
up your
our
comments,
report.
please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen Harrell is up. Matt Taker is next.
Thank you. Good evening. I read through the material that was presented. Is this on? Yes. Read through the material that was presented, and I did have several questions. One of the questions that I had related to the issue of the vulnerable populations, and I was wondering whether all of those issues that make a population vulnerable are discrete and separate. In other words, when the numbers are added up and we come up with some sort of sense of trying to imagine how many people we have that are part of a vulnerable population in San Mateo, does the senior disabled lady who doesn't have a car and it doesn't necessarily speak English as her first language, does she end up being counted 5 times, or is she in there once? So I think that's an important issue, because otherwise we're going to either be understating or overstating what kind of issue we have to deal with. I did find it fascinating, since there's a real push amongst a number of planning agencies, and we hear it here in the city too, to start tinkering with the idea of providing parking to go along with residences, that perhaps that's not necessary anymore, to find that a person is described as being vulnerable if they do not have a car. And I think that that's a recognition of the fact of the way we live and what we expect in our lives. Whether we're driving it every day or not, we still want to have that car, we need to have that car, we need to park that car. The other thing that I want to comment on is that in the issues about barriers to participation, there was a good list of things that would be barriers, but there was a specific reference to people being low income and potentially working multiple jobs as being unable to attend, and it said specifically evening meetings. And I agree that that's undoubtedly true. But I think we also have to recognize that the way people got to the top of some of those economic charts, making the $150,000 or whatever, is because they're part of fairly well-paid 2-income households where people don't have that much control over their own lives either. They are not home in time to come to this meeting. They're still at work. Believe me, my son is still at work at this point. So I think that we need to broaden that statement and recognize that the ability to participate cuts across many economic lines for a variety of reasons. The other thing that I wanted to comment about was that the concept of whether we are going to be able to wrap our arms around everything that may be affecting us, and people are now asking us to be able to go back and figure out what caused things to be the way they were from the past, that's a major historic effort. Historians are still arguing over what caused World War I, and people still argue over what caused the recession in 2008 and whatever.
Excuse me, would you bring your comments to a close, please?
I think it's really going to slow up this process if we have to be able to put our fingers on exactly why things ended up the way they are, because there are so many different factors that bring us to where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Taker is up. Matt Goin is next.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Matt Tacker. Glad to see the presentation up. There's also this handout, and then there's a transcript also, and there's more handouts over there. I'm Matt Tacker. I'm an architect. I'm an urban designer, planner. I've been that for 30 years. Have a degree also in economics from University of Chicago. My career has been focused on how to make walkable communities by encouraging compact mixed-use development and to create places like your downtown. I've been involved in numerous general plans and been asked by the Bohannons to contribute constructively to the general plan process. You have a big challenge, I think, around housing demand. I've looked hard at the demographic and economic information in your existing conditions report. I've also used geographic information system tools to look at the extent of available land in the city. After careful review, I can tell you that you have a serious problem. There is a mismatch between your projected population growth and the availability of sites that are likely to develop. In your existing conditions economics report, Table 1 and Table 18 present city population over time. One is the past trend, the other the future, ABAG projections, and I've made a graph, that's your first page, using those same population numbers. I've used simple math to convert population numbers into housing units and applied San Mateo's current population household size of 2.6 persons per household. If I'd used the historic size of 2.4, the housing demand numbers would be even greater. So if you rely on ABAG's estimates, the general plan needs to accommodate roughly 10,600 new homes. Now, next page. Land available for development. It's important to get at least a rough idea of the available acreage to see how things might fit. How much land is available for San Mateo to grow? Well, San Mateo has been fortunate to have extremely large development sites like Bay Meadows up to this point. Growth will need to rely on small and medium-sized infill sites from this point, however. For infill to make economic sense, development occurs on underutilized sites, and in the case of San Mateo, these would include vacant sites, large surface parking lots, and one-story commercial buildings. Using these criteria, I identified the location of underutilized parcels by walking your city, examining aerial photographs, and leaving entitled projects out of the analysis. Community members have said they want to protect San Mateo's residential neighborhoods, so residential areas, residential buildings, and downtown's historic district are not included as available sites. Based on this underutilized land analysis, about 225 acres are likely candidates for development across the whole city. But only a fraction of this available land will be built on. We can expect that only a fraction will be built on because property owners don't redevelop for a variety of reasons. For most, cash flow on existing uses may be just fine as is. Family trust and other ownership situations can complicate things. Commercial uses might be built instead of housing, and landowners often hold out to build something bigger later after the zoning has changed.
Excuse me, would you bring your comments to a close, please?
Okay, so do the math. You can do the math, and then if you go to the next slide, you can see that employment growth might be even greater than what ABAG projected. And if you go to the next slide, that suggests even higher housing demand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Goin is up. Alex Melendrez is next.
Thank you, members of the General Plan Subcommittee. My name is Matt Goin, and I'm with Fair & Peers, a transportation consulting firm here in the Bay Area. I've been asked to look at the question that is on everyone's mind: why has traffic increased in San Mateo? So we went and dug up some data that we think can supplement the information in the existing conditions report nicely. So let's use an example of something that a lot of people here can face every day. Why is our evening commute or evening trip to a shopping center such as Costco, why is that so much longer than it was in past years? Well, to answer that, we need to take a step back and look at it from a regional scale. The Bay Area has created nearly 1 million jobs in the past 10 years since the Great Recession, and we're at pretty much 4 million jobs. This has been generated by the technology sector between San Francisco and Santa Clara, with most of the jobs happening between that corridor. San Mateo County itself has created 83,000 jobs between 2010 and 2017, and those workers need somewhere to live. San Mateo County has also created 7,100 housing units. That relates to about 9,000 workers that could be accommodated in San Mateo County. So many of these workers are coming from outside of the county, from places such as the Outer East Bay, where there's been a surplus of housing that's been built during this time. San Mateo County is a net job importer. It has 63% of all workers that work in San Mateo County come from outside of the county. And that is the highest in the Bay Area. These people are coming from San Francisco, Alameda, and Santa Clara in probably similar amounts. However, San Francisco and Santa Clara commuters are stuck. Well, they have more options. They have 101, they have 280, they have Caltrain. People who are coming from Alameda County are stuck going over the San Mateo Bridge. What that means is that this job housing imbalance increase over the past decade or so has greatly increased traffic congestion on the San Mateo Bridge. It's gone from 1 hour to nearly 5 hours in the afternoon of just standstill bottleneck getting onto the bridge. That has then spilled back onto 101 and 92, and many more regional commuters are now using local roadways to access the bridge. We dug up some data that shows that the amount of people that have used that are using Hillsdale Boulevard to get from northbound 101 to 92 has quadrupled in the last 4 years. This is a substantial increase to the amount of traffic on local roadways, and this is just one example of many of how other roadways such as Norfolk or Fashion Island Boulevard are being affected. We also wanted to look at housing and how housing has affected traffic conditions, and what we found is that it's not a huge effect, a couple percentage points here and there on Hillsdale and some other roadways. And that's really because a lot of the housing that's the people that are living at these houses are generating fewer vehicle trips than are typically generated elsewhere. So in conclusion, why is your trip to Costco that much longer these days? We would conclude that it's because of the job housing imbalance and the location, unique location of San Mateo at the base of the San Mateo Bridge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex Melendrez is up. Jordan Grimes is next.
Quite a height difference from the last person. Hello, subcommittee. My name is Alex Melendrez. I'm with the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. We work with communities and their leaders to produce and preserve quality, affordable homes. We would like to agree with Councilmember Bonilla and Rodriguez and Commissioner Lee about including stronger language in the vision statement. We would suggest that under diversity, respect should be replaced with support and encourage. We would also suggest that under inclusivity, decisions should be replaced with experiences, processes, and our civic culture and society. As someone, I believe, mentioned earlier, in the subcommittee's economic report, it highlights how low-income households are likely to be working 2 jobs, thus hampering their ability to be engaged in the civic process at meetings like this one tonight. Given how a low-income household, given how precarious the situation is for a low-income household or how likely they are to be displaced, I would say that these individuals are less likely to attend these types of meetings than other groups as well. There's also a portion that mentions how that evictions that are actually up by 300% disproportionately affect minority households. And so this all kind of leads me to ask kind of the following questions. How many homes do we need to build and create to create an inclusive community and meet our existing 20-year housing need? The other questions I have is what sites are available to meet that need? And when do we start that conversation on where do we build these sites? These are all important questions that I feel need to be addressed and answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jordan Grimes is up. Justin Alley is next.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. So on the whole, I really appreciate all the different changes to the economic element. There's clearly a need, or there was clearly a need from the last version for further information, and I think the addition of specifically information related to housing and displacement were really badly needed. So I want to commend staff and the consultants for working to hone in on that. I do, like Adam, still think that there's work that can be done specifically around acknowledging how we got here. And to that effect, I'd like to try and read, in my remaining time, just an article that I think really encapsulates how we got here. It's entitled, Bay Panel Criticizes San Mateo Job-Home Ratio, and it's from March 6, 1987. Over the past 6 years, jobs have seriously outstripped housing in San Mateo, according to the Bay Area Council. The council notified the city that during that period, it issued permits for 34 office buildings with a total of 2.3 million square feet of space, enough to accommodate 7,641 jobs. In a letter to the Community Development Department, the council said its statistical guidelines indicate that absorbing that many new employees would require 5,743 additional housing units, but only 1,061 were constructed. Community Development Director Richard Coleman said, quote, we can't expect the new potential employees to live in, we can't expect all the new potential employees to live in San Mateo, but more than anyone, we are acutely aware that we have a severe housing shortage and have been doing our utmost to meet the need. So look at housing prices now. Look at this trend of overbuilding office space that has spanned the last 3 decades, and all of a sudden it starts to look not quite as complicated as some previous members of the audience may have implied. I also want to finish that by saying the Bay Area Council letter states in part, quote, clearly the recent job growth in San Mateo has not met with a commensurate amount of residential development. The result of such unbalanced growth is higher demand and thus higher costs for housing and an increased amount of incommuting and thus more traffic. We know how we got here. We know why things are bad. They've been bad for a long time. They've been getting worse for a long time. And I really hope that in the process of going through the general plan and plotting our future, we look back so we make sure we don't make the same mistakes over and over again. The last thing I want to just leave you guys with is Einstein's definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. So I hope we keep that in mind going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Justin Alley is up. Michael Nash is next.
Hello, General Plan Subcommittee. I'm Justin Alley, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of One San Mateo. We want to thank staff and the subcommittee for their work on revising the existing conditions report. We have consistently maintained that a proper accounting of the displacement pressures facing renters is an essential component of any existing conditions report. Thus, we are pleased that data on the very difficult situation facing many renters have made their way into the revised report. Some of those data deserve to be emphatically underlined for the sake of future discussion. The data show that rents in San Mateo are some of the steepest in the region. The data show that over 2/3 of renters, that means the vast majority, are rent burdened. The data show that between 2012 and 2015, there has been a 59% increase in the number of economic evictions. But what is worse, the data also show that there has been a 300% increase in the number of no-fault evictions. The hardships which have been heaped upon renters in San Mateo over the last decade and more constitute one of the defining aspects of housing locally. It follows, therefore, that addressing the staggering strains placed on the renting populace should be one of the top priorities of this general plan update. So we posit that what is called for is significantly more housing within reach of the low and very low income demographics. But we also know that it is impossible to ever sufficiently respond to the displacement pressures facing renters without finally providing renters with the humane protections they deserve and which other responsible localities have instituted. Moving ahead with the general plan update, we look forward to the city vigorously taking on the issues facing renters so that we can ensure a vibrant, diverse, and just future for this city we love.
Thank you.
So hi, I'm Mike Nash. I'm speaking on my own behalf. So I just have a question and a comment. I think the question is, I didn't see in the general planning process any discussion about what we used to call exogenous variables. And most of the discussions that are exogenous variables, things that are outside the scope of what we control, that have a profound impact on what we're doing. And we're all talking about, the housing and jobs imbalance, we're talking about traffic congestion. All of these things are heavily influenced by cities next to us, other cities on the peninsula, the county, what they do as well. And I haven't seen anything that says, hey, let's take a look at this and see what can be done about it. I think our regional governments are not working very well because they aren't stepping in at that point. The other elephant in this process is the CASA Compact and SB 50. If SB 50 passes, its reach will be the entirety of San Mateo. They call it transit-oriented development, but if you read what the bill says, it would cover every square inch of the city and therefore take over all zoning rules from the city and move it to the state. So things like that, I feel, are relevant to understand and at least look at. I don't know what we do about it, but I wanted to make sure people are thinking in that way. Thank you.
Drew
Thank
is
you.
up. Michael Reagan is next.
Good evening, members of the subcommittee. Drew, speaking of myself, plus some other people that couldn't be here and stuff. So I appreciate on the vision statement, the member Rick Bonilla that talked about that respect, expanding that out a little bit. I just appreciated that thought and stuff. And then on the arts and culture, I appreciate member Eric bringing that up about how that changed. It was interesting to hear how you were thinking about that. And I'm like, okay. And I've also wondered with that arts and culture, could that be, it's kind of an inverse thinking, I guess, is could it be part of inclusivity? Because it's like including all these arts and all these culture and stuff. Could it be included somehow in that one? And I also appreciate member Amber's Lee, the stuff about inclusive beyond decisions and stuff. I kind of think it's beyond decisions. However, that said, someone I asked about this and they gave me a very good reason why decisions wasn't, and I appreciated their explanation to me as well in the past. So, so on a couple, kind of a question around the existing plan, how do master plans fit into the existing plan? Or how do things even being kind of constructed? Like the sanitary sewer plant right now will be being rebuilt during the time this plan's being done. There's a bike master plan. There was a South El Camino plan that was done about 10 years ago, has a number of ideas. The Hillsdale train station, as some of you might know, I'm passionate about that, is moving north. So there'll be these drawings that show it where it's at, but in reality, it's going to be north. And so how does some of this stuff that's in process of changing show up in existing, but it's kind of like this planned thing that's happening at the same time? I'm kind of curious about that. There's about a dozen big master plans that are on the city's planning website. So, and then I just wanted to say I'm sitting in the back and I appreciate the mics, all the work that's been done. I know it's been raised, just can hear people, the sound and stuff, and I just appreciate the work that was done to make that a reality. Thank you all that were involved in that.
Thank you.
Michael Reagan is up. Tim Tosta is next.
Yes, hi. Thank you for letting me speak. Just a couple of things that I've noticed. I've lived in San Mateo since 1978, so I've seen a lot of changes over the years. I was also on the general plan back in the early 90s. I was on this same kind of committee. It was a much larger committee of people around the community. A couple of things that I've noticed. Inclusivity. We strive to include everyone in decisions for a shared, sustainable future. I worked pretty hard on trying to get Prop P approved, 7,000 signatures. I'd like to see that on the ballot. I think if we are going to include people, and if this is going to be a true statement, then I think that the city council should allow people to have that decision. It's in there, so I think that should be important. Housing, when I first looked for a house, I wanted to buy a house in Atherton or maybe even Hillsborough, but I couldn't afford it. I bought in Redwood City, moved to San Mateo, bought a home here. Unfortunately, we're not we're kind of in the dilemma that the pricing of land is, and the cost of building in the area is very restrictive as far as trying to get housing that's affordable for people. It's just, if you guys can figure it out, I'd love to hear it, but it really is a problem, and I understand young people. I have 2 children. One lives at home and one's in Ukiah. And, you know, I understand the difficulty of that, of trying to work that out. But I do think with housing, the one important thing would be trying to get more city workers, the police, the firemen, develop that into the pattern. We really need to strive on trying to get these people to live close to the area. I served on that academy, this last one, and we talked to the police and the firemen, and they said that how many of them live far away from the area and how difficult it is to afford to live here. So I think that would be important to incorporate that into the plan. And then last, the gentleman was speaking about the traffic problem. And that is truly a regional problem. You know, it's not a city problem. It's brought on. If you notice after the morning and then commute, and after the evening you commute, it's rather quiet. It really slows down and it gets back to normal. So it is an outside force that's causing the problems in San Mateo, not San Mateo itself, which is good. But I think what we really need to do, and what the city council and the other cities on the peninsula really strive in, is high-speed rail out to the East Bays, and incorporating more, getting cars off the road, getting maybe BART to come over San Mateo Bridge, and really looking that as the future. We need to, we need to really strive as not just a city, but in a larger scope, and getting people in and out of the area in a much better way than cars, because it's obviously not working. But thanks for your hard work on this.
Thank you.
Okay, Tim Tosta is up. Anthony Kinslow is next.
You've seen me before. I'm Tim Tosta. I'm a 30-year resident of San Mateo, but I'm also a land use lawyer representing the Bohannon family. We put Matt Tacker and Matt Goyne before you because the difficulty with existing conditions reports is they put a huge amount of data in front of you, but they don't prioritize it. And essentially, and we've done polling all over the Bay Area for various clients, so I know how the peninsula has been thinking and where voters are. Number one issue is traffic. And the last gentleman, or the one prior to that, suggested that was exogenous. I love those words. We used to call them 50-cent words, which shows you how old I am. But they actually, if you listen to what Matt Tacker was saying, it's that we didn't build enough housing here. If we built more housing here, and Foster City built more housing there, and Burlingame built more housing there, we wouldn't have this rush across the San Mateo Bridge creating the havoc it is. The difficulty is we've been on a 30-year period of not producing enough housing because we've been driven to lower heights and lower densities to the long-term detriment of the single-family neighborhoods in the community. Point one. Point two is, in order for you to proceed, we have to get much more detailed information to make decisions about housing. That is, housing for whom? And that's a demographic determination. Unfortunately, the bands of demographics you're looking at in the existing conditions report are extremely broad, and that's got to be refined to bring in. You have one bracket that's 34 to 50. That's a pretty damn big range to think about what their product types are. But what I'm concerned about is, what do the different age groups seek in housing, and are we going to provide that? The single-family dwelling neighborhood is becoming a dinosaur. People can't afford it. Older people don't want to be in it, but they don't have an alternative product. You have families that want to get into new homes. It won't be a single-family home at the prices we're at. We've got to start figuring out what product is actually going to satisfy the demand that has been accumulating ever since Measure H/P was brought into existence. I've been reviewing every year's housing report to the HCD from the city of San Mateo. Found an interesting statistic in your 2008 report, which is that the city of San Mateo has, on average, produced housing for that year at 77% of the maximum allowable. So if your top density is 50 DUs per acre, you're essentially getting 40 DUs per acre. If you look at the remaining acreage in San Mateo and divide it by the expected ABAG number, that's 94 dwelling units per acre. And you can't get here from there without changing the rules. And what you're doing is digging a hole that's going to lead to the following problem. You either build high and dense in select locations, or you're going to go where Minneapolis has gone, and you're going to rezone single-family dwelling zones into fourplex zones. So anywhere
Excuse me,
between
would you
one.
bring your comments to a close?
This is the big finish.
Thank you.
I just want you to be ready for it.
I am ready.
So basically, you've got a choice between having select high-rise centers and high density, or you're going to have to put the housing in the neighborhoods. And if you want a stick-out kind of building, put a fourplex in the middle of a single-family dwelling neighborhood. So I'm afraid the people who put this in place have shot themselves in more than the foot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anthony Kinslow is up. Rick Carr is next.
Thank you for allowing for all these comments. Two things. My name is Anthony Kinslow. I am background civil engineering and sustainable design and construction, and business owner and resident of San Mateo. Want to commend on first the environmental stewardship and the encouragement of low impact design features as we are looking at this growth and the impact of climate change. There's going to be more strain on the infrastructure, so encouraging low impact design features such as pervious concrete, pervious pavements, etc. is a great thing. I would also like to maybe, I don't know if this is already included in it, but how can we get homeowners to start doing this as well? I didn't know if that was encouraging just new zoning, but also current homeowners. I know in Germany they do that where they actually charge you less for stormwater and things if you're doing that in your own property. Other thing, I noticed energy saving features for the fire station and other locations. I'm also a consultant for San Francisco International Airport for energy efficiency, and one of the things that they have a problem with, and that most places end up having, is that energy efficiency starts getting knocked down when the cost starts being looked at. And part of that is because that the metric for success is the upfront budget as opposed to the operational budget and the life of the building. And so rethinking what our metrics for success are, and in the contract development for the contractor, what are they reaching for versus what is your expectations from them, not just keeping below this minimum upfront budget, but also a larger look at what is the operational cost for the city and accounting for that in your expectations. So thank you.
Thank you.
Rick Carr is up. Lori Watanuki is next.
I will try to make my comments quick. Basically, the beginning of the discussion was about comments for the meeting and who should be talking and do we have comments. My first comment is any meeting should always have a post-public comments input. The other thing I could add to that, conversely, is that if you want to limit outsiders from speaking, it might speed up your comments. Moving right along, we're all aware of the infrastructure problems, the traffic problems we have in San Mateo, and the master plan is really important. If this is done wrong, you're going to have problems later. I'm going to give you one horrible council decision that happened about 25, 30 years ago. The parking lot at College of San Mateo used to go down a hill, and there was a break in the fence there where you could go down Barneson and cut through. They don't have that anymore. The city council sold the land off to developers. In the old day, you could walk up and go through up to the campus. So this is a kind of decision that comes along and poor decisions can be made. I will not begin to discuss how much money the city has lost by not getting revenues from the track. They are making over $1 million a year, plus many jobs out there, but I won't even go into that now. The next comment is, with infrastructure and all the other things that are going on, and all the projects that are in the pipeline, you need to take a timeout and come back and revisit all the problems that the city has for the stress on the infrastructure and for the environment that this last gentleman mentioned, and say to yourself, this is what's going on, what are we going to do about it? We cannot stop all the projects that have gone that are coming up. It's already been approved by the Planning Commission. But in about 3 years from now, we're going to be suffering more and sitting in here. Your only real solution is to get boats to come in to South San Francisco or Coyote Point, and these people can go on buses to their jobs and extend Caltrain farther. I don't know how you're going to get BART to come down here. That'll be way beyond my lifetime. But the people come in and they come out, and the effects of the traffic go for hours. And yes, on weekends it's a little bit better. I donated my car to KQED about a week and a half ago. I haven't bought a new car. I won't, because the traffic here and the infrastructure of getting around is impossible. I ride my bike. I'm almost 70 years old. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to ride my bike. I like it. But the influx and the infrastructure and the feeling of living here now, with all what's going on, it's not like it was. I was born in this hospital, and I can tell you, it's getting worse and worse and worse, and nobody seems to want to step up to the plate and do something about it. And I'll stop at that.
Thank you.
Lori Watanuki is up. Nathan Chan is next.
Good evening. My name is Lori Watanuki, and my comments will be on the revised circulation element. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Avenue are designated downtown connector streets in the revised circulation element. What is the definition of a downtown connector street? 2nd and 5th Avenue are among the narrowest local streets in the central and north central neighborhoods, and currently experience too much cut-through and backup traffic from the downtown to 101 and back to downtown. This heavy traffic impacts our quality of life. According to Hexagon's accident report, which I turned in, there were 273 accidents on 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Avenue over a 16-year period. This accident report needs to be updated to 2019 in the general plan. And how will the city address these high accident numbers with this new classification of designated downtown connector streets? 2nd and 5th Avenues are local streets from South Amphlett to South Delaware, and the threshold is 1,000 vehicles a day. And we need traffic calming to address the high accident numbers on these residential streets. 5th Avenue is the preferred pedestrian bike path and pedestrian and bike path to Central Park, downtown, and the Transit Center. There is also a property that has qualified for the California Historic Resources criteria and is located at the northeast corner of the intersection of East 5th and South Humboldt Street. We would like to know the environmental impacts of this downtown connector street classification on the property at 107 East 5th and other residential homes on 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Avenues. We would like to reduce the traffic and heavy trucks, air pollution, and noise impacts. We do not support the CASA Compact, which designates my single-family home property to a 75-foot height. Measure P will protect the character of the neighborhoods. I will put my concerns in writing to you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nathan Chan is up. Maxine Turner is next.
Hello, my name is Nathan Chan, and I want to speak on the incredible opportunity that's before you. I know a lot of you have worked really hard on this general plan update, but one thing I want to emphasize is, San Mateo is the second largest city in San Mateo County, and so that means that any actions that are taken within this city have an outsized impact on what happens in the rest of the county. And we know, as previous speakers have mentioned, that that the county does have a housing shortage. It does have major traffic concerns. So I think that should certainly guide how all of you think about how to address the housing element, how to bring people closer to the jobs, how to make San Mateo a more diverse and inclusive community. I can say that I've at times considered working in San Mateo, and I really love the downtown area. It would be it would be a place that I would like to live close to and have that option to. And Central Park obviously is lovely as well. And I think that emphasize a general plan update that would sort of extend this message of welcome and inclusivity would be something that this committee should strive for, and would send a very positive message to the residents of the city today, the rest of the county, and future residents who would love to call San Mateo home at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maxine Turner is up, and Evelyn Stivers is next.
Good evening, everyone. I sent in a letter very late, but I do hope that you'll be able to use it and put it on the record. I will not be reading it. I'd like to start by saying we're getting wonderful input tonight, and it's always a pleasure when I can agree with Jordan and Justin, and I want to say that I do support, we do need affordable housing, and we do need to protect our renters. But as many people have said, we have an imbalance. So we've got to start with saying, we're going to learn, Einstein is right, we can't keep approving jobs, and we just have to focus on housing. But the housing doesn't exist in a vacuum, and that's why we're all here. We're trying to figure out how much more housing can we put in San Mateo and still address all of the issues of traffic, infrastructure, et cetera. But one thing that I do want to bring out, which has not been talked about at all, is sales tax revenue. And I know that's going to be talked about more and more. I thought the information in the economic was way too broad to give us any meaningful direction. And so I'd like to request that the sales tax information be updated by distinct sub-areas within the city, such as our malls, Hillsday and Fashion Island, the downtown, along El Camino Real, and in neighborhood shopping centers like 25th Avenue and Laurelwood. And evaluate in particular how plans to eliminate parking and displace the small businesses along El Camino Real with housing, which is a plan that has been talked about, the Grand Boulevard, lots of names for it. But how is this going to affect city revenues, and how will it impact the small businesses that are currently there, that are very important to lower income business owners? And we have a lot of displacement going on in the city, and as well as trying to pay more attention to avoiding housing displacement, I hope we'll start paying attention to not displacing small businesses. They're a very important part of the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evelyn Stivers is up.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. And I am really sorry for putting in my card in late. But I'm Evelyn Stivers. I'm with Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. And we really appreciate this process and all the hard work that you are doing. We really appreciate the existing conditions report addendum that Farron Piers and Mr. Matt Tacker created. That's exactly the information that we've been looking for. So many of the goals and policies that we will be talking about, really, the context matters. And who we want to serve, what populations, what demographics, what type of housing. You need different policies in order to enable that housing. And depending on the sites and what transportation is available, that will change the building heights, the densities, and the different demographics that you can serve. I know from our members, our affordable housing members, that we know of at least 3 affordable housing developments that were not built in San Mateo because of the height and density limits that are currently on the books. So what are the policies that we're going to put in place in the future to make sure that we're not missing opportunities like that? To make sure that we are serving our most vulnerable residents. So, and also the working people that serve our community. So thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this great process. And we look forward to seeing the very specific land use data and the actual ideas on populations that we want to serve as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no more speaker slips. Is there anyone that we've missed in the audience that would like the chance to speak? Okay, thank you all for your contributions. So now we will open it up to the subcommittee questions and discussion. Julia, would you like to point us in the right direction?
So we can do a couple of things. We can have the subcommittee, have staff and the consultants respond to some of the questions that came up. This is something similar to what we do at Planning Commission meetings. And then the next step could be then go through and have GPS member comments and questions after that, whichever one works best.
I think to have you answer any questions that came up would be great.
Okay. So, I think there's a few. I'm sorry.
If I could ask everyone in the audience to please respect our need to hear what's going on up front. If you have any conversations, if you would just like to step outside.
Somebody just said they can't hear.
We can't hear you.
Okay, I'll say it really loud.
Make noise.
It would be really helpful to us up here as we're trying to go through this process to be able to hear with outside conversations. So if you have anything you want to share with your neighbor, please just step outside, share your comments, and then come back in so that you can hear what's going on. Thanks.
So there were definitely a lot of public comments that weren't necessarily questions regarding the content of the items that are on the agenda today. Questions or comments pertaining to the how we get there, information that might be needed for policies or goal setting. So all of that, I think we would generally, kind of like what we did at the last GPS meeting, group those comments and questions. We're tracking them, but group them for the next step in the process. And so we are noting those comments that pertain to future goal and policy and sort of program comments and questions. Sorry, give me a moment. I'm going through. Yeah, I mean, if there were any specific questions that you've noticed from just listening to the public, you can certainly ask that as I'm looking through my notes right now.
I found one.
Okay.
Okay. Initially, in the earlier public comment, Karen Harrell got up and spoke regarding vulnerable populations. She was interested in some people might have been being double counted there. Can you talk about that?
Thank you, through the chair. My understanding of that data, that comes from the U.S. Census, and people can be members of more than one category in that list. So that this is on the economics report. It's table 7 on page. It's on page 11 about the vulnerable population. So yeah, somebody could certainly be both disabled and homeless, or a senior and a non-English speaker, and they might show up in both of those rows in that table.
There was a question about sales tax and drilling down further in specificity regarding the malls versus small businesses.
So,
Generally, we did take a look at where the general plan covers the entire city, and typically getting down to specific businesses and specific geographic areas, typically we would do that at the specific plan level, like the downtown specific plan level. There's also some sensitivity, in terms of the information that's presented, and so if you have one business in one category that has certain financial information, and we can't disclose that. That's so. I think we, when we were scoping out the existing conditions report and looking at sort of what information, if we're looking at retail trends and the impacts, we know folks are shopping more online. Well, that's impacting all retail sectors, whether it's in Bridgepoint or Hillsdale Mall or downtown. And so we're looking at more, in this existing conditions report, that's for the general plan, we're looking at this level. We're not looking at the specific geographic areas, and so that's where we sort of made the decision to kind of separate the information.
I can just add to that, to note that in the next phase, when we look at land use alternatives, again, this is pending the council discussion of our revised scope on April 1st, but what we anticipate is identifying study areas, and some of those study areas might be places where there is existing development today, like along El Camino Real is a great example. And so I think looking at what's on the ground today and how that might change in the future is definitely going to be an important part of the land use alternatives process. So not necessarily pretending that we're just starting from a blank slate, because we certainly understand that that's not really the case and for a lot of parts of San Mateo.
And at that level, would we be able to parse information about sort of larger operations versus smaller businesses in terms of their revenue?
I think we can look into that and see what information can be disclosed. I think there's some nuances and sensitivity, and so we want to just make sure we're doing things legally and appropriately in terms of disclosing information. Because just for example, if we only have one business in one sector, and that's in this geographic area, that would not be appropriate to disclose.
Yes,
I heard it. I heard a question, or I guess I heard a couple comments from the public that were asking if it's possible to figure out or look at scenarios that how we got here where we are, and we also heard a member from the public that said there's a lot of different variables that would be needed to be taken into account. What is the feasibility of doing such a study like that?
I would say it would be very, very challenging. We can spend the entire project budget on that and still not come up with all the different ways that that land use decisions could have been made in the past. Additionally, there are, for any folks that have been involved in development of any type, there's a lot of factors that go into a development decision, not just the price of land, but also the cost of construction. So, in terms of being able to hypothesize what sort of information and the economic, reasons why developers make certain decisions, the city alone doesn't have all those factors to be able to go through those analysis and go back in time.
So how do those limitations, or how are those limitations going to affect how we're able to hypothesize what's going to happen in the future when we're making a bunch of assumptions on all these different scenarios?
So, good question. A part of the process coming forward, we're going to identify the study areas, and then we have a list that's going to be taken to council on the first on what specific criteria we would use to analyze the alternatives, whether it be building height or income levels, or there's a whole list of issues that we would analyze, and so those will be defined. You can analyze hundreds of different things. So we will narrow that down, and we will take a look at the areas that are most sensitive in the city of San Mateo. Housing, traffic, we've heard that. Heights and densities, we've heard that. So there are a handful of things that we will be looking at. Impacts to public infrastructure. And the council will have an option to decide or discuss those. But there's hundreds of issues we can be looking at. We're going to narrow it down and focus on what's more specific to San Mateo and the issues that we're hearing from the community.
Thank you.
I heard another question about syncing along the way with the master plan, but also legislation that might be coming down from the state? How is that going to be baked into the process?
So there are other concurrent efforts by other city departments, and so we are working with those department representatives to make sure that we're coordinating. So that's one thing sort of staff is doing behind the scenes. And as those projects progress, we will integrate that information. The other thing in terms of just state we are subject to state regulation in terms of the information that we include in the general plan update process. As new information comes through, we will present that. Now, if the state legislation, I think currently has several bills that are working through the state. It's a lot. And so we will, as information becomes available, but it keeps changing over time, and so sometimes it's not that helpful, but it is something that staff and the consultant team is tracking.
And just to add to that, it's very likely that it could be a disruption to our general plan process, depending on what, is signed, and so that's a reality. We'll keep tracking it and making sure that we're providing information as information is needed to the General Plan Subcommittee and the City Council and the Planning Commission, but that's definitely on our radar.
I called all my friends I know in the legislature and asked them if they would be willing to stop passing legislation while we're doing this general plan update. They said no. Sorry.
So I have a couple of questions. I actually have questions regarding the two speakers that spoke from one Mr. Tacker and one Mr. Goyne. I'd like to ask them each a question if we could get a little clarification on what they said. Okay. So, Mr. Tacker, what are in your opinion, what are your potential consequences of building or not building new homes in the city of San Mateo? I mean,
well, building fewer homes. Job growth is what drives housing demand. And in the absence of satisfying housing demand, then prices escalate. It's simple microeconomics.
Okay.
So, and then, to talk a little bit about, the point that Tim brought up, and that is that, what I showed really was focusing development in just a few places, possibly with greater intensity. The effects of that actually are very efficient as far as infrastructure goes, as far as fiscal impacts and environmental impacts go. The missing middle alternative that Tim alluded to about having fourplexes in neighborhoods and so forth actually have a great many effects, means that you're blowing out the operations of intersections and things like that. So not exactly the question you're asking, but related, I think.
Yeah, but related. So thank you for that comment. Thanks. So, Mr. Goyne, why did you not consider, what would be the difference between building in single-family neighborhoods or locating additional density, new construction at train stations, in your opinion, based on the information you presented?
Yeah, so what we looked at was, what the data that actually the city of San Mateo collects, which is driveway counts at a lot of these new developments. And what those show is that they generate trips. Obviously, people are going out and making trips, but they are far different than what you would expect from a typical single-family home. And that correlates with a lot of national data that's available, which basically says that when you build homes that are in areas that are in diverse and dense locations, there's like a mix of land uses, and they're close to high-quality transit, the people make choices to use other modes. And people who live in those locations don't drive a lot less. So when you start to concentrate housing in places like Bay Meadows, you also see that they are going to be driving a lot less than if they were concentrated in, say, the neighborhoods, especially alluding to what Tim was referring to, where if you built fourplexes in the single-family neighborhoods, they're going to drive a lot more than, per se, if you located them in, next to Caltrain stations.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. That's why, I mentioned the microeconomics, and that's sort of against the, the backdrop of everything. It's interesting to note that actually there is an affordability bump that you get by having housing near transit. That people who are able to live without a car or with only one car per household and all, there's what's called the housing plus transportation affordability. It's a different way of thinking about affordability than is typical, which is just to look at the rent or the mortgage and all. But being able to, when you actually add the household transportation cost to the housing cost, it gives you a more accurate indication of actually how much people are spending out of their household budget. And of course, people who live closer to transit don't need to have that car expense.
All right, thank you.
You know, if we're going to have an open discussion where people are going past
No, we're
the
not.
formality,
No, we're
people
not.
shut
Thank
up.
you.
But we certainly were.
Well, that was in response to his question, so I think that's allowable. But no, this is not a public comment period.
So are there any other questions from the General Plan Subcommittee members?
Oh yes, I have some questions. Okay, so let's see. I was really excited to see the revisions in these two reports, and especially the inclusion of the civic engagement section. From my perspective, civic engagement as a section has a really important place in the economics report because it definitely correlates to our economic health. And I wanted to make a note that many, as more of our workforce is pulled in to San Mateo from outside, and housing prices push people out, it's the people like our teachers who can't actually reside in San Mateo that can't elect their school board members. It's the police and fire department, our public servants, who can't participate in city council elections. And so I really wanted to see some tables and some data on civic engagement. It's one of the few sections that was in the document, but missing any data. And so I would really encourage us to go back to that section and pull in some data, even some baseline things like voter turnout, number of registered voters versus eligible voters, turnout by different kinds of elections, turnout by precincts even. I think that that's a really important place to go deeper. Is that possible?
It's two questions. Maybe we can start with the numbers in terms of the teachers and the local. We don't have that data.
Yeah, I mean as an example.
Yeah.
Of how civic engagement is connected to our economic health.
Yes. So I would say, at the time that the economics existing conditions report was done, I can say that we did not have the data. And so, even now, to try to get that data, we would not have it. So in terms of the information, but I think your point about including city employees, the teachers, and outreaching to them and getting their voice into the process is important. And so I think that point is something that we are. I have talked to Ken Chen as well as some of the other school reps to try to bring that and figure out a way to include that voice. In regards to elections data, I think maybe Joanna can say something.
My understanding from looking into this a little bit is that there is data available from the Register of Voters about voter turnout by precinct for state and federal elections. And I think through looking at number of registered voters, I believe the census has data about citizens over 18. I forget exactly the way that would probably be an acceptable proxy for eligible voters, that you might be able to do that comparison.
That would be great. I think that also the local elections would be something to look into including, and I have found that data available at the county clerk's election division, so I'd just point you there to that resource. My next question, does anyone else want to go?
Can I follow up with a question? When I was reading through, I was curious. Sorry, God. I was curious on the census data. So we have a big census coming up in a year. My one question, well, first question would be, how will that data affect our general plan process, since it'll be coming in after the fact on a lot of this stuff? And two, when I was reading through the report, there were census updates. I think one was 2016. How are those done? How are those census updates done?
My understanding is, I was much louder than everybody else for some reason. There's quite a lag with census data, so the data is collected, and I think, are you talking about one of the decennial, the 10-year big updates? From the time that that data is collected to the time that it is quantified and tabulated and reported along all the metrics that we're interested in, there's a bit of a lag. I don't know exactly. 2 years is information I'm getting from the audience. I don't know that myself, but a bit of a lag. And so the likelihood of having that data available for this process, I don't know.
The Census Bureau does actually take some in between the 10-year points, additional information where they ask of certain selected households, however they pick them, for more new updated information. That's where they get some updated information between the 10s and the 10s.
Right, and so much of the census data that's available or that's presented in the existing conditions report is for an average over a 5-year period up until 2017, which supports the 2-year lag we just discussed.
Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, may I firm up? I'm assuming we're going to do comments later. I don't actually have a question. I'm going to jump. I apologize and do a comment because I am going to have to leave a little early, but I'll be brief. The big issues that bring out the advocates, which is what most of the audience is, are land use and transportation, housing and traffic. We understand that, but I wanted to commend staff and the consultants for the update, particularly in the economics existing condition report on vulnerable populations and on childcare, because that's the stuff that gets forgotten and lost, and they're not showing up in the audience, but it's a huge issue in the city, and hopefully we'll all be mindful of those needs of those groups as we move forward, even as we're talking about density and land use. Anyway, so thank you. I thought that was great. Big help.
Emrys, do you want to finish, and then we'll move on to other people?
Okay, sure. Okay, so, this actually dovetails very nicely because I was actually going to comment on Table 7, the vulnerable populations. I was thrilled to see that part included, and my hope was that we could actually see that in a longer data range set to understand trends, if possible. And so a question to our consultants if that's something we can include.
Sure. So in Table 7, in terms of the categories, and again, this is the vulnerable populations, and so it has rows like cost-burdened households and non-English speakers. My understanding is that going back to 2000, the census did track at least some of these categories. It's certainly possible that definitions may have changed over time and methodology.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't necessarily guarantee an apples to apples comparison going all the way back that far, but there does appear like for some of these categories, there's probably data going back to the 2000 and 2010 census.
That would be great. Okay, and I was just reading a report in the Mercury News titled "Bay Area Pushing People to the Breaking Point," and there was some really interesting data there that 2 in 3 renters are sensing a decline in quality of life, and roughly 80% of respondents in San Mateo County called traffic a serious problem, and then in looking at the circulation report, it wasn't exactly apparent to me that we have a real way of quantifying just how bad traffic is, and I was wondering, is there a way that we can display that information? I know that, I mean, it's clear that we have more people coming in from further away, and you would then assume that they're driving longer because they're further away, but I feel like everyone's feeling it, but it wasn't so much reflected in the report. And I'm wondering if there is information, database information about that we can pull in just to kind of put some numbers around it.
So as Julia mentioned, at the next step in the phase when we are identifying study areas, prior to that, we're going to do an educational series. We're proposing to council as part of our rescoping that we do a series of different topics. One of the topics will very likely be traffic, and should be traffic. So we're hoping that we can address in a more user-friendly graphic format the severity of traffic and provide that information in a format that everybody can understand.
That would be great. And I think building off of that, one of the suggestions that I would like to propose is that, when I look at the general plan that we have right now, there are many excellent policies that support multimodal transportation and traffic mitigation. And so what I was wondering and hoping for is that along this process that we can work towards an analysis on why, what are the barriers? What are the barriers to implementation? How are we not getting to where we need to be given that some of these policies are already in place? And how does that relate to transportation and policy? So is there, is that part of where we see ourselves going in the process?
That is part of the next step as well. You're right, we do have a lot of policies and goals that are in the current general plan, and part of the next step is to look at that, what we have in place, and then what do we need to do more.
Great.
And just in addition to that, our Public Works Department, they do track, like in the rail corridor area, there's a TMA, and there's a report that comes out every year on, how are we doing with TOD? What are the numbers? Do they meet what we projected? And they do. Well, they did, at least last year. This year I haven't seen the report, but that is information that we do track. So we can provide a lot of that if anybody wants to see it.
That sounds great. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Ken, did you have any questions or comments?
I guess just for clarification, are we going through each one in terms of the vision, the economic one, and then the circulation, or are we just going to throw it all out there? Because I have comments on each of them, and I just wanted to clarify so this way.
So I think
Just
initially,
process.
right now, we were just asking sort of questions and
That's-
comments,
yeah.
and then typically what happens is I think we go through,
Yep.
what's on the agenda, so vision, and then, yeah.
Just for clarification, I just want to know. So thank you for calling me out. I don't have any questions at the moment. Thank you.
Eric, do you have questions? Rick, how about you?
I think I've asked mine.
You've asked yours, okay, and I've asked mine. So why don't we then, did you guys have anything else that you would like to mention at this point? So why don't we then look at the vision statement, any other comments? I would like to say though, so the process was that the committee, along with our consultant and staff, put together the vision statement, and we commented on that. And it was edited and then sent to the Planning Commission for their comments. So I'm not comfortable with us changing the language of this, because that means then we have to send it back to the Planning Commission to have them look at it before it goes to City Council, because it won't be what came from Planning Commission to City Council. And in thinking about it, are we focusing too much on a broad statement when what we really need to do is take our nitty-gritty approach down to the next level and then really start going at the real defining words in that kind of a statement? And if you disagree, then that's why we're having this discussion. So what do people think about their comfort level with the vision statement going to the City Council as it was after the Planning Commission?
Through the chair?
You don't have to go through me, that's okay.
Okay, so I have a comment about that because, I have a question. Are we advisory to the planning commission or advisory to the city council?
The way that the council structured the GPS is you're not advisory to either one of them.
Okay, so then why wouldn't we actually put forth the vision that we put together as well as the vision that the planning commission put together and let the council work with that?
So we can certainly do that in this presentation and have 2 slides to show both.
Good, thank you.
And just to make a statement, we are presenting to council both versions, and it shows it in track changes what the subcommittee commented and what the planning commission commented in different colors. So it's clear to the city council which direction was received from either board.
If that's the case, then maybe we can, if there's enough consensus today to look at some revisions from the subcommittee, we can just add some more track changes in blue that would be.
The packet has already gone out, in terms of the city council for next Monday. So I think, what we were suggesting is in the staff presentation, then note that there were these 2 versions. One was the version from the GPS. One was the version from the planning commission. And then as part of the staff presentation, then provide some feedback in that we did have this meeting with the GPS. Here are some additional comments, and put that out there.
Okay.
But only as part of the staff presentation.
Sure.
Okay.
Does it make sense to review the suggested edits then?
And then do we have to come to consensus then as a committee for it to be in the presentation to city council?
If it's possible to come to consensus, I think that's helpful. If it's not, certainly we will note that as well. But if it's helpful, I think for staff it is much more helpful to come to consensus.
Just to add in, I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but the intention of adding this item to the agenda really was just to show you what the commission's comments were. Tonight's bulk really should be focused on the existing conditions report and providing comments and feedback on that. I mean, if the subcommittee wants to provide additional feedback on the vision statement, we're happy to share that with the city council. But I really do think that we should be focusing on the next steps, which is now the existing conditions report, and then beyond that, gearing up for the fun stuff and identifying the study areas and looking at, what change do we really see occurring.
If I could, I also just want to mention, I know we talked about this last time, but just to reiterate once more, especially for those who might not have heard it at our last meeting, that the vision statement is not final even after April 1st until it's adopted as part of the general plan update. So there are going to be opportunities to tailor it going forward. It's an important thing to get right.
If I may, I don't want to be stating the obvious, but we have 2 of 5 council members sitting up here with us on the subcommittee, and they could obviously carry the water. But for us, certainly the comments, the edits, I could play with the words, but the general concepts that were brought forward by Rick and by Eric on 2 different sections, I concur with. And, I don't want to open this up for an hour debate any more than anyone else does. But if we can come to quick agreement on that or not, we'll find out whether we can then move on and have something that can go in the staff report and maybe take this a little bit farther. It's certainly what Rick and Eric proposed made perfect sense to me.
Actually, so since we're still on this, I do actually have other comments I'd like to make regarding inclusivity.
Well, I may not agree with those.
You may not agree, but we're counting on it. So, regarding inclusivity, I feel like there are some words, and actually Eric's call for culture versus cultures, right? 2 different things. I think might be better, Drew mentioned, under inclusivity. And so I have some suggestion that we add some words that describe how inclusive we are and of what different things, because this is a how, not a what, right? So, for instance, it would say what it says: we strive to include everyone in decisions, experiences, processes, our civic culture, and society. Followed by for a shared sustainable future. It picks up what you're talking about, our civic culture, I think.
Not exactly.
If I may make one suggestion, I think, so we have two major things to focus this meeting on. I know one of the GPS members needs to leave a little bit earlier. We can do a couple of different things as, staff can note the comments that have been shared and make sure that we mention them in the presentation, not necessarily reach consensus, not necessarily edit the vision statements tonight, but just
That's
so
fine.
that staff can include it in the presentation and just mention it, and then the larger council can discuss. And then that gives us, more time to be able to go into the meat of the matter, which it sounds like there were some questions about the existing conditions, if that's okay. Okay.
Eric, why don't you state what your comments were again?
My comments were that the We Celebrate Arts and Culture is period. It really doesn't fit really well in any of these 5 buckets. If I had my pick, it would probably be prosperity, but we were told that prosperity is almost touching the little plant that the guy's holding, so we don't have enough room there. So I think that if it is going to be in diversity, I think it should be how it was when it left here. We celebrate arts and culture. It doesn't have, there's a lot of important things about diversity and inclusivity we're trying to communicate. This is not necessarily one of them. That's what I'm saying.
So then that's in the version that we already completed that you have going to the council now. Okay.
And do you have Rick's comments then?
We will make sure we have Rick's comments, yes.
But I do support staff's wanting to move this on and not just keep going back to this, because council is gonna get all this information, so.
Yes.
If I may comment. So I was here at the last meeting. I sat in the audience. I didn't speak. When you guys talked about the vision and the value statements, and I know there were conversations about schools, and I give great respect to the comments from Councilmember Bonilla and Councilmember Rodriguez about the school district with different governing bodies and the idea that how much the city can and cannot impact the schools. While I sort of would still love to see some sort of schools word sort of in there, I'm okay with not having it in, but I did have the comment about the learning opportunities in the prosperity, and I wasn't sure if learning opportunities was a planning commission add-on or whether it was a staff add-on. When it says learning opportunities, I almost think you're sort of dancing around the word educational, and so I don't know whether or not you just replace learning with educational, because it just doesn't sound right to me. So, and there are not just public schools, but private schools, a number of different learning educational opportunities, including my daughter's art class up the hill, or piano lessons. There's a bunch of different things, and I think that it just seems like we're dancing around the word. That's all.
Sure, so I can speak to that as the person I think who was assigned to help wrestle some of the GPS ideas into a revised vision statement. The comments that we heard were both that schools are very important, as you noted, and also that the city doesn't control the schools. And so we also heard comments that part of the opportunities that the city does control are some of the recreation classes, which might be less quote unquote educational and maybe more artistic, for example, or learning about movement or other types of things. So we wanted to cast the broadest possible range, and that was how we ended up with learning opportunities as opposed to either education or schools, both of which terms were kind of thrown out in the discussion, and I know we heard a range of perspectives on them. Ultimately, the GPS did not specify using learning opportunities specifically, but that seemed to be the broadest term that did a job of encompassing those aspects of the community life that the city has a little bit more of a direct role in.
Can I ask a question? When you were going through the process of trying to figure out how do you walk that tightrope between conveying our want to say that schools are important to us without kind of crossing that and not making it look like we control the public schools. Did you look into saying something under prosperity along the lines as we cultivate a diverse and thriving, or we cultivate diverse and thriving schools and economies with different types of blah, 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 blah?
I'm sorry, I was trying to write and look back and forth. Can you say it one more time, please?
Yeah, I was just, I know that we basically punted this to you, and I was just curious, did you look into the idea of saying we cultivate diverse and thriving schools and a thriving economy with different types of homes and jobs and opportunities and services and blah, blah, blah. But maybe wordsmith it, but I noticed that, I wasn't going to open this can of worms, but I did notice that the word schools wasn't there, and recreational learning opportunities, I don't think kind of captures what we were talking about before.
Sure, I think that would be an opportunity. I mean, if you guys want to have this discussion, we can. What I heard last time was that some people were not comfortable with this, and it's like, we cultivate schools because the city feels that that might overstate the role of the city government in schools.
I think that's exactly where our discussion went, was we did not want to state schools because that does not fall under the city's purview. So I think Joanna was trying to find some kind of wording that would address education without saying it. I mean, we don't have control over private schools. We don't have control over our public schools from a city standpoint.
No, I'm okay without having schools in there. I would just sort of, the idea of educational opportunities is pretty broad in my mind. The argument that you're going down in terms of the city cultivating recreational and sort of like along the lines, in my mind, it's like park and rec in some ways. I would sort of disagree, because when you think about it and you think about how the city can control schools or educational opportunities, you can clearly look at the zoning code and think that the zoning does allow and have a section for institutional zoning. And so the idea is there are abilities for the city itself to cultivate educational opportunities, either through zoning or through parking management or through special uses. There's a number of different ways, and so I would somewhat disagree with the fact that, you know, the city does not have a role maybe in public schools, but in other schools and educational opportunities, I think the city does have an opportunity.
So if I may, through the chair, we'll go ahead and note these comments that have been shared tonight, and then include that as part of staff's presentation going forward to the city council. So if there's no additional comments on the draft vision statements, perhaps we can move on to the second item. How would you like to do that? Just go down the row?
Why don't we do that? Rick, can we start with you?
Sorry?
Would you like to make comments on the economics?
Oh, the economic, I was impressed with the improved, with the changes to the economic study here. I found it really thought stimulating. I went through and I actually made quite a few notes and looked forward at a lot of the other issues that were brought up. I think it's very well addressed. I think it could make some points a little stronger, but it's basically all there. It presents choices that we need to look at and think about before we can go forward. These need to be part of the discussion that we will have when we get more of the actual participatory meetings that we're proposing to have with the public, the workshops. And I think that's where we're hoping to see many more people come in and weigh in with their ideas, their thoughts, their feelings about where we should go regarding these things. It's clearly stated, and it was repeated a couple of times tonight, that economic evictions are up, no-fault evictions are up, housing is way short. It's clear. You can look at the charts. You can read the numbers. We don't have enough housing. The big question is, where do you go from here? So that, I think, we need to have the public process. I think we've laid good groundwork for it. And I think with questions we've asked here now, we've improved that. So I'm happy with this as we're going with it right now.
Thank you. Eric, would you like to comment next?
I pretty much agree with Rick's comments. I think the staff did a pretty good job adding it. Thanks.
Emma?
Kudos goes out to staff and consultants.
I share the sentiment. I am really happy to see so much of what the committee asked for and the public asked for integrated. The fact that it has been integrated and not addendized it was a really, I think, a really big win for public education about all these issues, and so I was so glad to see that. I feel really satisfied with what's here right now. I have some, obviously some questions about where there are opportunities to include more, but I also have a lot of confidence that there's going to be so much more learning and in-depth information provided along the way. And so as much as I've been, crying for more and more and more data, I feel very reassured that that we're going to get to a point where there's going to be really robust data and really solid analysis in this process and through this process. And so I feel really strongly that we're in good hands and along the path.
Cliff, did you have any more?
Yeah, very little, ditto, and ditto, I guess. But those were all good comments, and I shared. I think this is a great document. One thing that we heard from the audience, it would be ideal if we had what I think would be known as sort of more of a dynamic snapshot, where you could look and say, well, here's where we are, and here was the policy put in place 20 years ago or 10 years ago that got us here. I think that besides being, as the staff mentioned, just an incredibly huge time sink that just would never get done, I think that's part of what we'll get from the public, as well as having played with land use for 30, 40 years, I could say. There's a certain amount of common sense, and then there's going to be people bringing data to the table from both sides, saying, well, that was a dumb policy, look what it did. No, it did this. And we'll have to analyze all that. It's going to be fun and an educational process. That's it for me. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. This is the first time reading through it. I did go back and look at some previous examples, and I read through the track changes. I did really enjoy the community health section and the child care section in terms of considering why there is a child care desert sort of here, and I think that was really important because that's part of the reason why I left the city of San Mateo. So the one global question I have is, as you introduce the community health section and the health indicators, is the city going to go down the road of including a health impact assessment to the general plan? This was a toolkit that was used in other general plans in other cities, and we do have great partners with the County of San Mateo Health System who have done them in the past, and they could help us out. So not sure if you guys are looking into that. You don't have to answer now, but I just want to put a bug in your ear, because when we talk about transportation, we talk about economics, the issue is there is a big issue and a link between the decisions we make and the health impacts of our residents. And if you want, there's a special plug from before in our Taste and Talk series about health impacts to the general plan. The only other minor comment I have is on the chart. It has Horrell Elementary. Horrell Elementary. The name was changed to Lead Elementary about 2 or 3 years ago. So if you want to put in parentheses, because I know this data is old, but if you want to just put in parentheses that it's Horrell Lead Elementary now, formerly Horrell. Otherwise, it was great. I did like the economic data as well as the school data. I did appreciate all that information as well. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think everyone's covered pretty much everything that I thought. As far as a snapshot goes, it was really great to read this and just to see exactly how much the city is engaged in. So thank you for that. And now, why don't we chat about the circulation report? And Eric, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I don't have that many comments. I think that I thought that, again, city staff did a great job on addressing kind of a lot of the holes that were there. I guess the one comment I have is I think that this is kind of the easy part, and moving forward is going to be where it's really going to be helpful information. And particularly, I'm going to be looking for, when we're talking about traffic, and I know we're going to have a big discussion on traffic, you know, on one side of a lot of comments, it's, you know, all the new housing and all the new building is bringing in all this traffic, and that is the reason why we have this snarling traffic. On the other hand, if we just build all this housing, you know, people are going to be able to live there and not be in their cars, and the traffic will go away. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, and trying to figure out what that middle is and what we're going to be able to do to make the trade-offs that we need to do to build more housing without, you know, totally killing our quality of life is going to be the $10,000 question that we're going to answer. So that's what I'm really hoping for on the next round. But that's all the comments I have.
Emma, do you want to go?
No, I think, yeah, I think just to reiterate the point about having more clear metrics around traffic worsening, that the way that the data is presented thus far, it's sort of it's an indirect narrative from my perspective, and so even if it's you know, surveys from the community, I think that it's worth noting that traffic is really bad, and that's like very clearly included in the circulation report. So it didn't come across to me like this like, I mean, but the pages should be on fire. Like, traffic is so horrible. Do you know what I mean? And that didn't exactly jump out at me the way I felt like it should.
Well, as the representative here from Sustainability and Infrastructure, Public Works in the common parlance, and looking at the able Public Works staff representatives that are here, I want to echo those and elaborate a little bit on those. I think this is an excellent snapshot, but of course the rubber hits the road, to use the trite phrase here, but is on how to manage traffic going forward, whatever we do, whatever the city decides to do in terms of growth, or even, you know, if somehow we thought we were going into a deep recession and going to depopulate, you're still going to have traffic issues. And there are no silver bullets. And I will tell you from innumerable meetings, some going back to when you were on the commission, you know, you can't please everybody. In fact, you can't please anybody on traffic. You just can't. But we got to do the best we can. And that'll be the challenge. It'll be fascinating to go down that path.
Okay. Circulation is sort of near and dear to my heart. I did work on this before, and I will say for full disclosure, I was the project manager who created the Sustainable Streets Plan. So I have a lot more comments here. But one quick question is, the addition of the existing goals and policies that are in there are really just as a placeholder rather than for us to comment on. Is that correct? I'm assuming that's correct.
It's just letting people know it's there.
Yes, great, thank you. Okay. The Sustainable Streets Plan itself was not formally adopted, but it was accepted by the City Council pending the CEQA evaluation of the general plan. I just want to put that on record. It does clearly state that on page, 33, when it talks about the Sustainable Streets Plan 2015. But when it first introduces it, it sort of just says it wasn't formally adopted. It kind of negates everything that took place during those 2 years of craziness. 2+ years. I was wondering whether or not the bike sharing discussion has to be updated considering Lime Bike's recent removal of all their bikes. So when it talks about bike sharing, I'm a big proponent, but this is now sort of out of date in terms of that information. And I know this was drafted a long time ago. I just want to.
August 2018.
Yeah.
We still had Line at the time.
Yes, I know. But I'm just bringing it up. There was a gentleman who talked about.
There's a new pilot program going in place.
That is true. That is true. There was a gentleman from the public who talked about successes. I would like to sort of highlight, or maybe we should emphasize on when we talk about the, what is this on page 25, the rail corridor plan. It talks about the 2017 annual report. While it talks about the decreases in the vehicle counts by 1%, it talks about peak hour pedestrian and bicycle trips increased by 93% and 96% respectively. It seems like that is a major win for the city in terms of how we talk about previous plans and master plans that were done in the city, and it sort of seems to be almost footnoted there. So I thought that might want to be highlighted a little bit more. On a number of the tables and charts, it would be great if there was a footnote for the year that it was done. So for example, figure 4, existing intersections level of service, there's no year. So therefore people go ahead and just kind of copy this and put it somewhere else. You have no idea what year you're talking about there. It is on other charts, so that's just more of a cleanup issue. The last sort of comment that I have is I was a little underwhelmed by the traffic consultant Hexagon, and I know Gary Black pretty well, so I know he'll probably beat me on the head on this. But the issue is that when we talk about the Complete Streets Act of 2008 and the idea of how we're trying to be more multimodal, the traffic impact analysis, especially when you look at Appendix B, really only has the turning movements at all these intersections. I do know for a fact that Hexagon goes ahead and at the same time they collect these turning movements, they also collect the ped and bicycle counts as well. And so the idea that that's not included is kind of a disservice to the idea that we're trying to be more multimodal and promote active transportation through this. So I think those are my comments. I do think that I would love to see a little bit more about active transportation, and then the idea is just bringing up the other topic of the health impact assessment. Again, there's direct links to the ideas of what our policy decisions we make affect the health of our residents, including the idea that people are stuck in hour-plus commutes to get here. So those are my comments.
Okay, well, the question of circulation is huge in San Mateo because we have traffic impacts. Many people question where traffic impacts come from, what they're caused by, what we can do about them. Many people talk about the infrastructure, saying we need to fix that before we can do other building. And the truth is we have a very finely woven web of all these other interacting factors that have to work together. Housing, transportation. There's been a disconnect. I think we all know and accept that. We want to reconnect. So, and we have lots of ways to do it. One of the big issues with improving circulation, which means, changes basically, changes to roadways, to intersections, is money. Where do we get the money? We're always struggling. Every city struggles for money to be able to do these things. Because there are many other priorities, competing priorities. And I could go down a long list of those. But the truth is, here where we live, at the intersection of 92, 101, 280, we have lots of big sources of cars, buses, trucks, We have trains. We don't have any ferries. We have bridges, which limit movement because they're only so big. The freeway system we know is being worked on because there's going to be a 101 managed lane project there, which is, I think, already starting, actually. Could be part of the solution. We'll move cars more efficiently, and hopefully, if cars can move more efficiently on 101, they won't get off the freeway to drive around on our surface streets, trying to get around things happening on 101. We do have a congestion management policy. I am a member of the board at commute.org, which is the Peninsula Traffic Congestion Relief Alliance, where we're working on a lot of things, including shuttles, last mile alternatives. We do have a ride-share program that people can access. It's an online platform at commute.org, because actually moving away from single occupancy vehicles would be a huge step forward to help improve circulation. I would recommend people have a look at commute.org, by the way, if you're interested in that at all. We need to increase ride sharing. Shuttles are happening, but they're not being done well enough. They're not distributed well enough. Once again, the money comes from CCAG, the City and County Association of Governments, which gets their money from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which actually distributes money all throughout the 9-county Bay Area. It's hard to find enough money to make all of these ends meet. There are only so many taxes that people are willing to pay. So these are the confines that we work within. There are other ways to improve how we study and work to make changes. We have been using level of service, which is the LOS standard for measuring delays at intersections. There's a big move afoot to actually change to vehicle miles traveled, because when you actually look closely at vehicle miles traveled, if you can cut those down, then you improve levels of service at intersections. That would be a big deal here. Okay, so I appreciate that Ken mentioned the Sustainable Streets Plan, the Complete Streets Plan. We do have these plans that were done when I was actually on the Public Works Commission, way back. I don't want to say when. So I want to see if we can look closely at those things. I see the framework here for those discussions. And so I encourage us to go ahead and work with all of the information that's been brought together, because there's a lot of very technical information that is definitely in engineeringese. So a lot of people might not fully understand it. It takes some time to study. Unfortunately, I've been able to look at these things for quite a while. So I look forward to the process. I think that as it's laid out right now, the existing conditions have been clarified much better than they were in the previous report. So thank you all.
And I would just like to say that the change from meeting number 2 to meeting number 5, when looking at these, the first time we looked at them, we looked at all of them, and we had about 20 minutes to talk about it. So this was a pleasure to have time to read it and to hear what everybody had to say. And thank you to staff for adding everything from that meeting, hard as it was, into our first two existing conditions reports.
So I just had a general comment. I think it's noted, all the GPS members' comments about information. The bike ped counts. It is true that that information is available. I think for us, what we're doing tonight is noting down all the comments, and we're going to be using that information to help build the educational series that we're going to do. Framing the context of the data that we have in terms of bike and ped counts, along with the work that Public Works Department is currently doing with the bike master plan update, and synthesizing that together, and in the conversations that we have with the community helps sort of provide that linkage. And so thank you for making all of those comments tonight. We are noting them.
So at our next meeting, which existing reports will we be looking at?
So we'll go ahead and take a look at what makes sense. Some of this, I think, staff will look at, and as I said, it's probably for later on. We may not make a move to modify this, the existing conditions report. I think, generally speaking, I didn't hear anything consensus-wise about going back to modify both of these reports. I think I heard comments about wanting information, and we can present that information at the later stage. I think a lot of the community wants to get into the how, and part of that includes, pulling together data, educational materials, sources from the county, and putting that together in the conversations, the workshops with the community. And so we could go through and continue revising this, but I don't think it's all that helpful. I think what we really need to do is probably know all the questions that have come in, and then make sure that we have that information as part of the education and the materials that we share with the community in the next set of conversations.
Could I add something? I just want to add that, given everything that I just said, talking about vehicle miles traveled, level of service at intersections, we have clearly the issues that are the result of not having these things fully managed. So I would like to see where we actually kind of work back from what we have through what can be done with alternative modes, with improvements, with all the different things. I'd like the plan to be able to show what we're going to do in terms of, everything right down to bike and ped.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I think the council will have the opportunity, as you look at the revised scope for next Monday's meeting. One of the state requirements is that the city integrate complete streets policies as part of this process. And so complete streets is looking at all modes of circulation, ped, bike, getting to transit, all modes. So yes, we will get there.
I'm talking about also regionally. We need to participate regionally in changing the way that people get here, right? And if we're smart, one of the ways you reduce people coming here, right, is by building some housing closer to where they work, would cut vehicle miles traveled, would cut carbon emissions, would also lend to less overcrowded intersections locally at major focal points.
So in the next step, as we go to the community and have conversations about identifying study areas and where we want to see change in the city of San Mateo, where we want to preserve in the city of San Mateo, we will be looking at, if we identify a specific corridor, let's just say, we're going to be looking at that corridor, doing a very technical analysis of what would it mean to add more housing here or not. And that'll be all part of the conversation. We have a team of sub-consultants and technical experts that will be looking at various modes of all the transportation and doing a very technical analysis on that measure.
Okay, good. Thanks.
So I did want to just mention for the record that with the rescoping that's going forward to the City Council, we will not be convening the GPS in April and May. And so the next one, based on the schedule that you'll see, it'll be in June. So for, just as a reminder, I think we've asked everybody to just kind of hold your calendars, the fourth Wednesday of the month. So I think for April and May, you can do other things.
And for the rest of the community, just to be aware, we will be going to council on April 1st with the rescoping, and then following that, depending on council feedback, we will be holding a series of community workshops, and those will all be advertised in a variety of ways, and outreach will be conducted by city staff and the whole team. And that's all we have.
Does anyone have any more comments on anything?
I do. I would like to add something, just kind of overarching comment, which is that if we do everything that we're hoping and trying to do here, that would bring relief to traffic, that would bring relief to the availability of housing, maybe even the cost of housing, hopefully build more affordable housing at some points. All these things are connected to climate, okay? All of these different things reduce carbon emissions. If we can solve the problems we have with circulation, with the regional draw of cars to the major workplace here on this side of the bay, then we're cutting carbon emissions. If we can build more efficient housing, and so people aren't living in Tracy where they have You know, for $800 a month, a 3-bedroom house with a huge yard, they're not watering that yard anymore because they're living in a modern, water-efficient building, electric efficient. Here, we're on Peninsula Clean Energy, so we're using clean energy instead of whatever the irrigation district might be out there or something, I don't know. But PG&E itself, making steps to try and get cleaner, but it's not there yet. So I just want to say that I'm hopeful that through this process, we'll be able to solve many problems, not just the things we're focusing on right here, but larger issues that threaten us all. So thank you.
Well, because we're talking about being hopeful, I wanted to jump in and say that one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how our diversity is such an asset to the city, and I think that for many years we've been sort of in a deadlock around some major debates of you know, more height, more density, less density, and when I look at I think it's easy to kind of to feel that tension and get swept away, but what my hope is that this process will be really healing to the community, and that when we bring our diverse perspectives together and we bring our minds together and our hands together to solve problems together, that we're stronger for it. And so I really just applaud the public for coming here, showing up, meeting after meeting, sitting next to your neighbor who you might completely disagree with, but but listening. And when we get to the place where we're actually trying to solve problems and think through solutions, I just want us to remind each other that we're all here to make San Mateo great, and that I think that we can get there together. And so I feel very hopeful about this process.
I just wanted to go on the record and say thank you again for letting me serve on this committee, and inviting me to this committee. I want to thank Adam. Well, actually, wish him luck on his recovery while he goes through his health issues, and hopefully he can come back and maybe we'll tag team on this committee, or depending on how long this takes. But I just want to go on record also in saying that I am a school board member for the San Mateo Foster City Elementary School District, and that school board is a different governing body, and my comments should be taken as an individual because the school board does not actually take an official stance on a lot of these issues that we're talking about here. So just for future reference and to be on the official record, I am an individual resident of San Mateo, with obviously a major background in what we're talking about.
Okay. We are adjourned.
Was that? Yeah, you did. Well, the next couple of ones are going to be the ones where.
I think I beat this one by most all of them. Yeah.
I think one of the
speak for it all.
interesting things that people aren't really
No, I am Laura.
that you could have
I speak
job
for three.
Yeah.
You could have a program
But you know,
and still
your
have
work particularly.